It is basically recognizing, and this is why we started with this extreme way of seeing difference, the Nazi extermination of a group, which was otherized. And we have that with us today all over the world. That's why this larger humanism, this is a purely secular concept, but it's a large-hearted secular concept. It is essential, which means that we do not recognize these boundaries. These boundaries are largely there in our minds between one nation state and another nation state. People subscribing to one organized religion versus another organized religion. I belong to this state, I speak this language, therefore I am different, fundamentally different from this other group of people who belong to that other state, speak a different language. It's getting stuck at these superficial parameters of difference. It's getting stuck at these superficial parameters of difference and regarding these differences as real, as fundamental. This is the nana iva pashyati. This is the perceiving of difference as an essential reality in the here and now. And that is being offered up as the fundamental obstacle here. It's such an individual who goes from death to death. Perhaps there was this belief, and perhaps that belief is still prevalent in at least the Indian subcontinent, of this reincarnation, etc., etc. But we need not go into those theological doctrines. When we recognize this difference, what we are really doing is we are encouraging this principle of death in ourselves. When we encourage this fear, anger, hatred, we are fundamentally recognizing somebody as other, otherizing somebody, some group of people, without this introspective intellect. This instinct to otherize is what clouds our intellect. This is the obstacle to this viveka. This is the obstacle to this, to becoming, towards progressing towards becoming this dhiraha, which is stated in the first verse. So iha nana iva pashyati. So this is what happens to such an individual. Mityosa mrityum apnoti, or mrityosa mrityum gacchati. Yeah. So if really you, at the end of it, this is the question that you want an answer to, what is that principle of immortality? And if you want to, if you really desire it, then what is being said is, introspect when you otherize. Is not that the otherizing is going to go away in a jiffy, in a moment. But when one otherizes, this is going to basically prompt us to introspect and ask, is this group of people we are regarding as different from ourselves fundamentally different? If, so for example, somebody belongs to a country which is, say, typically a neighboring country, let's say. If such an individual and I were there on an island, would we be able to recognize that this person belongs to some country and I belong to another in terms of our day-to-day human interactions? No. So where then is this notion of difference? Is it real? No, it does not stand the test of empirical verification. Therefore, it's just something that we have as personal prejudices, as biases, which clutter our mind and cloud our hearts and minds. And therefore, looking at it, looking at this source of anger, hatred, fear towards another group of people, animals, other beings, all that comes later. But basically developing this larger humanism, that's the first step. And so, not recognizing the other person, it's not that when we look out, we'll see various things. Yes? But we do not recognize that this person is fundamentally different from me. Yeah? This is samatva, samabhavitva. Yeah? Which means what will be then our reaction? And this is where the training is necessary, training of ourselves. This individual that we see as this person in front of me has the same rights, the same joys, the same woes, or sources of them as I do. And it is there one expands into recognizing that this principle of consciousness, which we regard as abstract, but which we see in this person in front of me manifested, that principle and that which is the principle of consciousness in me is not fundamentally different. In essence, they are the same. This recognizing of sameness, this recognizing of common rights, common privileges for all, not as it's said, it's not that some are more equal than others. It's genuine equality. But that genuine equality is to be recognized in one's spirit. Unless one introspects and sees this fundamental reality about oneself, to some extent, it is not possible to see the other person as fundamentally the same as me. Neither the body, nor the mind, not even our thoughts, nor the world we see around us are infinite. The seer, he to whom they all belong, the soul of man, he who is awake in the internal man, alone is infinite. And to seek for the infinite cause of this whole universe, we must go there. In the infinite soul alone, we can find it. And this is the last thing that we had quoted, and we'll come back to it here. What is here is there too, and what is there is here also. He who sees the manifold goes from death to death. This is where we had stopped last time. And towards the end, we were a little hurried, so we'll go over some of this a little bit, because it's actually terse and somewhat profound. Yeah, what is here is there too, and what is there is here also. He who sees the manifold goes from death to death. The original verse, see, he's giving a free translation, so he's not quoting, he's not talking about every single verse of the Upanishads. He's giving a selection. This is the original verse. It's the 10th verse of the second, of 2.1.1, the first valli of the second adhyaya. Yeah? 2.1.10. Yat eva iha tat amutra. Yat eva iha, that which is here. Yat, that, eva, itself, iha, here itself. Yeah? Tat amutra. Amutra is there. Yeah? That is there. Yat amutra, that which is there. Tat anu iha. Yeah? Yadeveha tadamutra yadamutra tadanviha. Yeah? That is here. Mrityoho, from death. Sa, he or she or whatever, person. Mrityum apnoti. So from death to death, such an individual goes. Who? Ya iha naneva pashyati. Ya iha nana iva pashyati. Whoever perceives manifold differences here, such an individual goes from death to death. Yeah? And the next verse, 2.11, 2.1.11, that has this second part of it recurring. So I'll state it, but that's not what Vivekananda has really translated. It's this 10th verse of 2.1 that he's quoted there. Manasa eva idam aptavyam. Through the mind alone is this to be attained. This meaning, this awareness of this inner core of one's being, what one calls the Atman. Manasa eva idam aptavyam na iha nana asti kinchana. Here, there is no manifold. It's stressing that again. Yeah? And if one does not recognize it, what happens? Mrityo samrityum mrityum gacchati. Apnoti is attains, gacchati is goes. It's basically, connotation is the same. Ya iha nana iva pashyati. Whoever perceives the manifold goes from death to death. This is the, we'll come back to this because this is a certain vitally important thing, and we tend to think of Advaita as this purely intellectual philosophy which is just supposed to be played around in some form of intellectual gymnastics. That's not the case. It is something to be carried out in practice, and this is the solution. And this is really at the heart of it. Yeah, it's basically whoever sees the manifold here, and the worst form of seeing the manifold, which is harmful not to others, well, it's harmful to others, but it does more harm to ourselves, is precisely this anger, hatred, fear. These thrive on the notion of the other. And so, whoever acts, when we act impelled by these forces of anger, hatred, fear, what we are really doing at the base of it is recognizing somebody else, some other person, some other group of people as fundamentally different from ourselves and hence entitled to something less than we are. Many years back, there was this beautiful film called Nuremberg. It's about the Nuremberg trials that were held after the Second World War. Yeah, I mean, essentially, the erstwhile Nazi regime was charged with crimes against humanity. Why? Because basically, some group of people, in that case, it was the Jews and the communists or whoever, or gypsies, whatever, these groups of people were somehow, through doctrine, through propaganda, they were projected as a group of people who were somehow subhuman. There were vested interests behind it, but we won't get into that. But somehow this propaganda was spread, and therefore, one group of human beings, it's not important what the specific labels are, but one group of human beings essentially decided that this other group of human beings were somehow intrinsically inferior, and therefore they could be subjected to inhuman tortures. Yeah, they were gassed, killed, various inhuman experiments were run on them, and so on. Now, in this particular trial, what came out, I mean, there's this person who is the judge. This is, of course, it's a fictionalized account, but I think it's somehow fundamental and it's related to this. What this person says is that he was, I mean, once one starts looking at the evidence, one starts asking oneself, what is it that in human beings that allows us to treat other human beings in this completely inhuman way? And he was really asking, okay, so fine, this is a group of people who were regarding this Nazi regime as quote unquote evil. That's a very easy and facile statement to make. But what this judge was doing was trying to introspect, analyze, understand what is it in us that makes us feel that that fills us with revulsion at this kind of an act. What exactly is it that makes us do this? So, in other words, what really is what defines evil in terms of not this kind of an emotional laden theological / religious condemnation, but really what is it? Something that a common individual without any theological baggage can understand, can grasp. He comes to the conclusion it's basically the same thing as absence of empathy, which means somehow or the other saying that this is what we started off with, a fundamental belief, axiom, or a conviction that some particular group of people on whom we impose labels conveniently is somehow intrinsically not worthy of certain rights which we think we have as human beings. It's basically saying that this group of people is fundamentally other, fundamentally different, and therefore they can be comfortably regarded as subhuman. Yeah? They do not have the same rights, the same freedom to work, to live our lives as these as us. Yeah? So this group of people is fundamentally different. It's lower than us. This otherization. Yeah, I'm using the word otherization deliberately. So basically, they have been made other, made different, and a conviction has grown that look, killing of these people, our moral senses need not feel revulsed. Why? Because such people fail to recognize this one fundamental truth, that there is at the core of our beings, there is no difference. What happens? So why is this being so strongly stated here? See, finally, when one comes to this quote unquote spiritual path, there is a certain motivation. And what is the motivation here? How did the Katha Upanishads start? Which question did it start? And it started with that question of Nachiketa, which says that basically some people say that after death somebody is, yeah. Some people say that such a person is no longer there. What is the truth about this? Yeah. And essentially the first whole Valli was essentially the first adhyaya was dedicated to explaining various things, and that question, the answer to that question is still continuing. See, basically the answer was given there that look, it is through a complete grasping of this a causal principle which is essential to our being, this conscious principle, grasping it with one's full being, identifying oneself with it, it is this that resolves the problem. Basically saying that, look, in our life, in this confused way of life that is our normal day-to-day existence, where everything is perceived in and through this consciousness, but still we somehow or the other feel that that which is reflected in this consciousness, namely our physical bodies, minds, etc., that's all that there is. This is all that there is. This conscious principle is something that is ignored. Yeah? And so the first part was essentially said that, look, turn your mind, turn your the fundamental faculties of the mind towards this inner core, and in and through that one will be able to understand that this conscious principle is not caught within the framework of space-time causation, hence it is not born, hence it is not subject to death. And this really is the essence of one's own being. But it's also said that this, the understanding of this fundamental fact is difficult for the clouded mind, for the clouded intellect, but it is graspable, drishyate tu agraya budbudhya. It can be caught through the one-pointed, sharp intellect, which can cut through the rubbish, cut through the coverings, and get to the core of things. Okay? That's fine. But then what prevents us? What is the obstacle towards developing that sharp, penetrating mind and intellect which cuts through the rubbish to the core of things? What is it that is preventing this faculty from manifesting itself? This, in Shankara's commentary on the Katha Upanishad, in the beginning of this second adhyaya, this is the point that he raises. Right? Look, the point of this whole collection of verses is that it asks of ourselves this question: what is it that is preventing me as an individual from moving towards this goal? Why? Somebody has told us that, look, this principle of, want of a better word, immortality, principle of consciousness, that which is there always, independent of space-time, etc., that's there in us all the time. Move towards it through a sharp, one-pointed mind. All right, good. And we, through our whatever empirical experience, suppose we grasp that, yes, what's been told is true. But then what's holding us back from it? Is it just this understanding? Once we get that understanding, we move towards it? No. What prevents it needs to be understood. What is the obstacle is something that is necessary to grasp. Why? Because, okay, so one wants to run faster, or one wants to move faster, one wants to perform some kind of action better. And then one keeps on doing that, but if one does it mindlessly, then chances of improvement are slimmer. Yeah. So the Chandogya, I think it's in some place, it was the very early parts, it says, Yat karoshi bhavanaya tat viryavattar balavattaram bhavanti. Bhavanaya means through clear introspective thinking, understanding. What is done through that kind of understanding becomes stronger, and viryavattara, meaning something which is imbued with vitality, not emasculated, not withered away. Yeah? So, here what is being said is that, look, if one understands what one's obstacles really are, then there will be an attempt, a conscious attempt to remove them from one's path, and this will make our progress, assuming that we want to grasp this immortality within us, much easier. Yeah? So this is really what is said at the beginning of in the Shankar Bhashya of the before, just as a precursor, as an introduction to this first verse. Paranchikhani. Yeah? So, Vyatrinat Swayambhu, etc. So, there are two things that are stated here as obstacles. The first verse itself says this: Paranchi kha ani Vyatrinat Swayambhu tasmat parak pashyati na antaratman kaschit dhiraha. Dhiraha. What is this dhi? And it's translated as somebody with viveka. Viveka is what? This introspective discrimination, analysis, this capacity to analyze and probe into one's own mind dispassionately, so that one can separate out that which is helpful towards one's progress, for one's progress, separate that out from that which is just an obstacle. This viveka, this capacity to discriminate, yeah, it's somebody who is imbued with that to some extent. Such a person recognizes this, kashchit dhira, but there's an impelling motive. So he sees that, pratyagatmanam aikshat, sees this core of one's being, pratyagatmanam aikshat, avritta chakshu, having withdrawn the mind, which means not granting fundamental reality to this visible world or this visible universe around ourselves. Avritta chakshu, amritatvam icchan. And this last is the impelling desire. Yeah? Why? Because the question that was asked, again, what is the impelling desire? It's the impelling desire that voices itself as the original question that's at the beginning of, that's at the basis of this whole Upanishad. Yeah? I want to know the answer to this conundrum called death. Yeah? This is the question of Nachiketa. And here also that answer is being given, that okay, you want to understand the conundrum of death, but unless you can see if death is something that is far off, it happens at the end in this crude understanding of death, okay, this body is going to die and I am going to die with it. And I cannot see beyond that point. Which means what? Which means that notion of death has to be brought here and now to be seen and its reality understood. Which means, is that alone death, or is there a ramification of death in the here and now? Because if that is just something distant, if that is just something that is going to happen at the end of this period that we call life, then going beyond it is meaningless. We will not be able to grasp its reality. And therefore, we need to understand, okay, what is it right now, right here, that is leading us to this thing that we call death, which you're claiming you want to understand the reality of. And essentially, therefore, there is a desire to get beyond it. What is that desire? That desire is amritatvam icchan. That's what has been said here. Yeah? Desiring, transcending, or getting to the basis of what exactly death means. Not in terms of any theology, not in terms of any Puranic concepts, not in terms of this strange, bizarre fellow with two horns and a lasso in his hand. None of that. But as a fundamental existential human reality, independent of theology, independent of religion, independent of baggage. That's what needs to be understood. And if that's to be understood, then we cannot push it off into this mystical twilight, which we call the physical extinction of one's being. Yeah? One will die, one will be burnt, etc., etc. But is there some aspect of it right now? If it is there, then we can catch hold of it, we can grasp it, understand it, and then hope to get across it, get beyond it. Yeah? And so then, if it is amritatva is that which is to be desired, the obstacle to it is mritatva, yeah? The nature of dying. Yeah? So what is the nature of dying? That's the real question. And is that nature, I mean the swabhava, the intrinsic nature of what we call death, is it there with us right now? Are we being stalked by it right now? And if we are, then we need to catch hold of it, look at it face to face. Yeah? If that understanding does not develop in us today, it will not develop when we are on the verge of physical death. This is what is being encouraged. So recognizing the obstacle is recognizing this mritatva and recognizing it as something that is there with us today. Today, right now, right here. All right? So that's the thing that has been stated in the beginning, that start developing this faculty of analytic introspection. Yeah? Kaschit dhira pratyagatmanamaikshat avritta chakshu amritatvam icchan. Fine. So then, what is its converse? And what is this? This nature of death which is there with us right here. That's being said here. What is it? Ya iha nana iva pashyati. Does that mean that we don't recognize a chair or another person as some? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. But it does not affect us at the foundation of our psyche. It is basically recognizing, and this is why we started with this extreme way of seeing difference, the Nazi extermination of a group, which was otherized. And we have that with us today all over the world. That's why this larger humanism, this is a purely secular concept, but it's a large-hearted secular concept. It is essential, which means that we do not recognize these boundaries. These boundaries are largely there in our minds between one nation state and another nation state. People subscribing to one organized religion versus another organized religion. I belong to this state, I speak this language, therefore I am different, fundamentally different from this other group of people who belong to that other state, speak a different language. It's getting stuck at these superficial parameters of difference. It's getting stuck at these superficial parameters of difference and regarding these differences as real, as fundamental. This is the nana iva pashyati. This is the perceiving of difference as an essential reality in the here and now. And that is being offered up as the fundamental obstacle here. It's such an individual who goes from death to death. Perhaps there was this belief, and perhaps that belief is still prevalent in at least the Indian subcontinent, of this reincarnation, etc., etc. But we need not go into those theological doctrines. When we recognize this difference, what we are really doing is we are encouraging this principle of death in ourselves. When we encourage this fear, anger, hatred, we are fundamentally recognizing somebody as other, otherizing somebody, some group of people, without this introspective intellect. This instinct to otherize is what clouds our intellect. This is the obstacle to this viveka. This is the obstacle to this, to progressing towards becoming this dhira, which is stated in the first verse. So iha nana iva pashyati. So this is what happens to such an individual. Mrityosa mrityum apnoti or mrityosa mrityum gacchati. Yeah. So if really you, at the end of it, this is the question that you want an answer to, what is that principle of immortality? And if you really desire it, then what is being said is, introspect when you otherize. Is not that the otherizing is going to go away in a jiffy, in a moment. But when one otherizes, this is going to basically prompt us to introspect and ask, is this group of people we are regarding as different from ourselves fundamentally different? So for example, somebody belongs to a country which is, say, typically a neighboring country, let's say. If such an individual and I were there on an island, would we be able to recognize that this person belongs to some country and I belong to another? in terms of our day-to-day human interactions? No. So where then is this notion of difference? Is it real? No, it does not stand the test of empirical verification. Therefore, it's just something that we have as personal prejudices, as biases, which clutter our mind and cloud our hearts and minds. And therefore, looking at it, looking at this source of anger, hatred, fear towards another group of people, animals, other beings, all that comes later. But basically developing this larger humanism, that's the first step. And so, not recognizing the other person, it's not that when we look out, we'll see various things. Yes? But we do not recognize that this person is fundamentally different from me. Yeah? This is samatva, samabhavitva. Yeah? Which means what will be then our reaction? And this is where the training is necessary, training of ourselves. This individual that we see as this person in front of me has the same rights, the same joys, the same woes, or sources of them as I do. And it is there one expands into recognizing that this principle of consciousness, which we regard as abstract, but which we see in this person in front of me manifested, that principle and that which is the principle of consciousness in me is not fundamentally different. In essence, they are the same. This recognizing of sameness, this recognizing of common rights, common privileges for all, not as it's said, it's not that some are more equal than others. It's genuine equality. But that genuine equality is to be recognized in one's spirit. Unless one introspects and sees this fundamental reality about oneself, to some extent, it is not possible to see the other person as fundamentally the same as me. This is one thing. On the other hand, if we cultivate this feeling of empathy, empathy is something that is deeper than sympathy. Sympathy is still recognizing the other and offering something in the form of compassion, blah, blah, blah. But empathy means basically recognizing this person in front of me is not fundamentally different from me. That leads to this expansion. And what is the advantage? The advantage is ours and ours alone. It means that yes, this physical form which we, in our day-to-day usage, day-to-day moving around, call my I, that is going to get extinguished. But because my being has expanded into this larger reality, that is not mortal. Because that individual and another individual and all people that are there who we recognize as individuals, this fundamental principle is not different. Therefore, I do not die at my personal death, at my personal physical death. This principle is not extinguished. And therefore, if one can identify oneself, and the whole practice, all the way of progress is really identifying this empirical little I with this larger impersonal or universal principle of consciousness which is there in all. Yeah? So the negation of that was said here. What is here, which means what? Which means what is here is this same principle of consciousness is there too in that other individual. What is there is here too. That what is there is here also. He who sees the manifold goes from death to death. Mrityosa mrityum apnoti ya iha nana iva pashyati. And then Vivekananda starts analyzing this. We have seen how at first there was the desire to go to heaven. See, in a certain sense, people were seeking joy. Yeah, everybody does that. And therefore, the untrained, unquestioning mind instinctively builds up a castle in the sky, saying, oh, there is this heaven somewhere out there. We cannot see, we cannot investigate, and therefore it's kind of hidden from us. Where there is only joy, there is no woe. And then we decorate it with all our prejudices. Person living in the desert imagines a heaven full of flowing rivers. A person in a place where there are lots of rains imagines a heaven which is a dry place. Pure imagination, not rooted in reality, not rooted in this introspective analysis. Which means basically such people are not interested in the truths. But if one is, and is not satisfied by little crumbs of theological doctrines thrown at one, then one investigates. Yeah? And then this notion of heaven and hell and all the rest of it, all the rest of these stories, they crumble and fall as something that is not worthy of a sincere mind, of a sincere intellect. Yeah? Basically saying that, look, if you are after the truth, then all these stories about heaven and hell and whatever theological doctrines there are, they just come up as mere social constructs which are probably valuable for a while, but they do not provide a real answer to an inquiring mind. They did not provide an answer to Nachiketa in particular. So these heavens are thrown away, discarded as not particularly significant, not particularly valuable if one wants a real answer to a real question. When these ancient Aryans became dissatisfied with the world around them, they naturally thought that after death they would go to some place where there would be all happiness without any misery. These places they multiplied and called Svargas. The word may be translated as heavens, where there would be joy forever. The body would become perfect, and also the mind, and there they would live with their forefathers. Vivekananda was never particularly fond of all these gods and goddesses in this empirical sense. I mean, these things, that these Puranic ideas of gods and goddesses sitting in the heavens. He has even made rather caustic comments about what do. They sit there, drink nectar, and get rheumatism. Yeah, get rheumatism is basically saying that they are not particularly equipped with this fundamental defining human quality of compassion, empathy, identity with all, but rather they are much more interested in this drive for power, etc., etc. Not something that is particularly covetable or particularly noble. That's the thinking behind this. But as soon as philosophy came, literally, what is philosophy? Philosophy and sophists, so it's love of knowledge. But as soon as, and one should translate this philosophy as literally love of knowledge, the literal meaning in Latin. As soon as philosophy came, men found that this was impossible and absurd. This eternality of joys, etc., etc., which is what these Svargas are supposed to embody, is impossible and absurd. It does not stand the test of enquiry to a mind that is committed to truth above everything else. The very idea of an infinite in place would be a contradiction in terms, as a place must begin and continue in time. Therefore, they had to give up that idea. This is the progress of thought. First, a naive mind thinking of these heavens and hells and all these stories, but the inquiring mind finds these explanations unsatisfactory and absurd, childish at a certain level, throw them away, which means probe deeper. Therefore, they had to give up the idea. They found out that the gods who lived in these heavens, this is the idea that had been propounded, had once been human beings on earth, who through their good works had become gods, and the godhoods, as they call them, were different states, different positions. Executive director of blah 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 company, of the company of the Varun Loka, whatever. Different positions. None of the gods spoken of in the Vedas are permanent individuals. Yeah? So essentially what one is doing here is discarding or cutting through a certain measure of rubbish, which is there as a shared narrative at best, essentially intended to stop the mind that is not particularly committed to truth. Okay, you want some answer? Here is some answer. We know you're not going to inquire into it because there are very few minds which really want to inquire. But those who do, they will not be satisfied by these silly answers, superficial answers of heavens and hells and blah blah blah. They will want to cut through that to the real truth behind all this, to the reality behind all this, cut through the narrative, cut through the stories. What do we get at? We get at truth. Truth is a very old-fashioned concept and we cannot define it. But there is an instinct in our heart which chooses that above everything else. And it is for such minds who are committed to truth above everything else that this path is laid out. Not in terms of narrative, not in terms of stories, but inquiry. What is true? What is true? Somehow the fundamental criterion there is, yes, I know there is truth in all this. I need to find it. What is the truth behind death is the question that is being asked. And what is being prompted here is an encouragement to proceed in that path of inquiry. Not get thwarted by the local wisdom of the priests, not the priestcraft. Vivekananda was very, very strong about all this stuff about priests who essentially have this understanding amongst themselves so that these other human beings, the so-called lower castes, etc., are people who could be exploited. That is not what this is about. That's just a division. That's a social malady. That needs to be overcome. And this fundamental Vedantic reality of equality of beings. Yeah? When one looks at another person, recognizing that this person, be a Hindu, Muslim, Christian, American, atheist, irrelevant. That irrelevant meaning of secondary or tertiary importance, unimportant. Can we get to that universality of vision? Recognizing fundamental unity in the person that is in front of me and oneself. We basically talk about it today as a secular concept of humanism. But here in the Upanishads, what is being talked about is that no, this is not a doctrine, this is not a social construct, it is the truth. And if you want to get at this truth, there is a way. That way is through this process of inquiry. When you recognize, and our anger, hatred, fear is not necessarily guided by these little mental constructs of that's a different country, that's a different religion, etc., that's a different language, etc. Most of the time, it is a temperament, a subjective temperament versus another subjective temperament. These labels are often secondary. And these differences in temperament, somebody likes, okay, this person is a very outgoing, extroverted individual, and somebody else is an introverted individual. I can't stand that extroverted guy. The extroverted guy says, I can't stand that introverted guy, thinks he's superior. All these things are mental constructs. That introverted guy is probably just it's his or her own nature. This person says, no, what are we really trying to say? We are basically trying to say this other individual should subordinate his or her nature to my tastes. That's what we are really saying. When we say that, oh, this is this group of individuals towards whom I find them completely intolerable, what we are really saying is that I am not going to poke into my own mind and discover my own personal prejudices. I am going to take those as something fundamental. Oh, this is right. And judge everybody else outside of me by those silly standards. What the Upanishad is encouraging us to do here is introspect and say, when you see another person as somebody other than you, and you feel this inimical feelings arising in your heart, introspect. Use this sharp instrument of analysis and poke into that to see this person you're feeling this animosity towards, whatever it be. Is that really that other person's individual's quality? Or is it something in me? Is it some prejudice in me? Is it some preconceived notion in me? Through that enquiry, what happens is that this obstacle, once one recognizes it, what happens? The mind starts getting trained carefully. This is really what is a ramification, what is an aspect of maintaining alertness at every moment in our dealings with other human beings. Getting caught in this mesh of otherizing and hence death. I'll conclude with this one little comment that in one of these other places, it's in the Mahabharata, in the Shanti Parva, it's called the Sanat Sujatiya Samvad. I think that's from the Shanti Parva. Anyway, the Sanat Sujatiya Samvad, what is death? There it is said, Pramado vai mrityu. What exactly is death? This is there right here, right now. What is it? Pramada. What is pramada? Self. Pramada is basically delusion. Yeah? What it means here is self-forgetfulness, lack of awareness, lack of alertness, lack of consciousness of the present moment. Yeah? This is what is the fundamental nature of death. It is this forgetfulness, it is this mindlessness, is this lack of alertness which is there with us at this very moment. Shine the light of alertness on it, it vanishes. It's not something that's going to vanish altogether, but it's a constant practice, not day to day, but moment to moment. And that practice, the better it is, the more well developed it is, this principle of death starts withering away and starts yielding the truth that is hidden in this notion of death, which we have postponed, which we have pushed into some twilight, some mental twilight where we don't want to look at it. It's bringing it up from there, bringing it up right in front of us, so to speak, and shining the light of the mind on it so that it reveals its secrets to us. Let's stop. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.